One of the greatest blessings in my ministry career was the 7 years that I ran and led and administered the Celebrate Recovery ministry at Canyon Ridge Christian Church in Las Vegas. If you're unfamiliar with the ministry of Celebrate Recovery, I recommend that you get on your browser and simply type in Celebrate Recovery, and it will take you to the Celebrate Recovery website where you'll see what their philosophy and basically what their methodology is. They are a biblical approach to the traditional 12 steps that you're possibly familiar with through AA or NA or GA. What they did was they took these 12 steps and reconnected them with their biblical roots. Not many people realize that when Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson began Alcoholics Anonymous, they formed their 12 steps from their own experience with a Bible study, the Oxford group. These 12 steps were rooted in a deep conviction that only God in His power could make it possible for an alcoholic to break free from being held prisoner by their alcoholism. And the 12 steps, in my opinion, are 12 of the most meaningful things that any individual could do, really, to deepen their discipleship when those 12 steps are connected with the scripture that from which they come. I'm a big fan of Celebrate Recovery. We won't know until we're in heaven how many millions of lives were saved. Families were transformed. Marriages were redeemed because of the ministry of Celebrate Recovery. Anytime I have a chance to talk up Celebrate Recovery, I will, because I believe in it. I have friends whose lives were literally saved by Celebrate Recovery, by the grace of God using the instrument, the tool of Celebrate Recovery. Nearly every one of the men and women that I had the privilege of working with and shepherding through that 7 years would tell you that somebody in their life enabled them to continue their addictive behaviors. By now, you will, I'm sure, have heard of a word or a phrase, the the negative enabler, or those people that we put in the category of codependent enablers. Essentially what this is a declension, or a brain is failing me this afternoon. It's a way of thinking of and describing people who are doing things that make it possible for the addict or the alcoholic or whatever their negative destructive behavior is, that these kinds of compensations, these kinds of enablings make it possible for this person to continue their destructive behaviors. Easy place to start throwing rocks is with the spouses and families of alcoholics. It is an embarrassing thing when your alcoholic spouse or dad or mom or sister or brother does alcoholic things. And one of the tendencies is to try and explain these things, make excuses for these things. Well, they just have had a really rough time, or that they didn't make it. I need to call and apologize for them not making it. They just aren't feeling well. They're just ill. When the truth is they were too drunk to get there, or too hungover to get there. These kinds of negative enablings, these kinds of codependent enablings are done for the noblest of motives. These negative enablers, these codependent enablers love this person, and they don't want this bad reputation They want to shield them from the consequences of their bad choices. However, their behavior is not likely to change until they pay the consequence of their negative behaviors. It's very, very difficult for this codependent enabler, this negative enabler, to step away and let consequences do their work in their loved ones' lives. A lot of people call it tough love. Well, it can, when a person is negatively enabled, and I keep coming back to use that term, they are permitted, and not only permitted, it's like when they make a mess, somebody comes along behind them and cleans up, so they never have to clean up their own messes. As long as that happens, listen, if I never have to clean up my mess, I won't. Why would I? I don't have to. It's not that simple with an addict, with an alcoholic, with a gambler, or with a sex addict, or the dozens of addictions that people are experiencing. It's not simple, but it does come down to this simple thing. These negative enablements must cease. So why am I talking about that? We're in the book of 1 Peter chapter 2, and the last thing we talked about is this phrase in verse 10. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. What in the world? How does that connect? Here's how. Mercy, I said it last time, but I'll say it again. Mercy is when I do not get what I deserve. Mercy is when I do not get what I deserve. When, for some reason, the consequences of my behavior are withheld, or someone stands between me and those consequences. So can you see how there's a connection with negative enablement, with codependent enabling? Well, here is the delicate, difficult thing. Mercy would say that if I am the spouse or friend or family member of an addict or an alcoholic or a person who is doing these destructive behaviors, that I would do everything I could to shield them from the negative impact. That would be merciful, except for the fact that it doesn't result in something good for the one I have just enabled. You see, mercy is rooted in love. And I think the best definition of love I learned from my friend B.A. Austin, who said, love is doing for the other person what they really need. Now, for this person who is locked into a pattern, a lifestyle of negative and destructive behaviors, would love say, I will shield you from the consequences of that? I don't think love would, because that won't get them what is best for them. What's best for them would be that they, on their own, because they have chosen it, would change their behavior. You can't change it for them. Nobody can change it for them. And the more you stand between them and the consequences of their negative behavior, the less likely it is that they would choose anything different. Mercy, and this sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but here's the actual, I think it's the bottom line. Sometimes mercy happens when I let consequences do their work. Is it not more merciful for me to let consequences get the attention of the alcoholic or the addict so that in recovery terms they hit bottom? Because from the bottom, I've never known anybody truly recover from an actual addiction who did not hit bottom. Now, there's rock bottom and there's less than rock bottom. I'll give you that. But there's a bottom for every addict. And until they reach that bottom, why would they look up or look out or look for some other way of living? It seems to me that the merciful thing, because it will produce the greatest good in their life, would be, instead of covering all their tracks and cleaning up all their messes, it stands to reason to me that the most merciful thing would be to step back in what some people have called tough love and let consequences come on down and send the message that only consequences can send. So the objective of these consequences is to get our attention. And then it requires discipline and self-control to choose a healthy, positive, godly behavior instead. This rarely happens in a moment. This is rarely an epiphanic moment where there's an epiphany and bingo, the change has occurred. It's much more often for the addict as well as for the negative enabler, the codependent enabler. Neither of them normally change their pattern, the pattern of their behavior in a moment. It's a process. I'd like to propose that it's a process of mercy at work in our lives. God extends his mercy to us. And honestly, if you reflect on your whole life's history, are not there times when God permitted consequences to come into your life that stung, but they got your attention? And they kind of motivated you. Maybe that's what I would most acceptably call it. It motivated me to evaluate my choices and adjust my trajectory, which that was actually a mercy. It was a mercy in my life that I had this unexpected asymptomatic heart attack in 2011. I wasn't going in bad directions. My life wasn't completely out of control, but one of the outcomes of that is that maybe this is the biggest outcome on a personal level, if I can be autobiographical here for a minute. It reminded me in a way that I don't know that anything had ever before reminded me or shown me how I treasure my wife. The 6 months of my recovery, I will say it every chance I get, she was an angel from God to me. She put her life on hold so that my very disruptive, needy, brittle kind of life could interrupt her very effective and successful ministry life. I'll never be finished thanking her and God for that. It caused me to re-examine and then reset my priorities. It made me have to say no to things that I probably would have said yes to before. These were not evil things. They were not, it's not like somebody asked me to go with them and knock off a 7-Eleven store. I'm not talking about those things. I'm just talking about things that if I said yes to them, I couldn't say yes to other things that really, in terms of their ultimate value, these things that I would not be able to say yes to were of greater value than the things that I might have been invited to do. I learned how to say no is what that amounts to. It was a mercy from God. One more thing I learned in that convalescence is, and by the way, this is a lesson that easily evaporates from my mind, but I did learn this. I learned that it's very difficult to be grateful and thankful and be in a hurry. For 4 of the 6 months of my recovery, I didn't do anything in a hurry. I couldn't. I mean, there was a period of time where I had to go the slowest I've ever walked in my adult life to get from a parking space in the parking lot to the back row of the auditorium for church. And that was kind of an adventurous walk. I had to go slow. I remember the first time I was able to drive my car after my heart attack. I drove 40 miles an hour and I thought I was going 80 because I had gone so slow for so long. And what I learned in that is you can't be in a hurry and be grateful. Hurry is the enemy. If the house is burning down, then hurry up and get out. But you know what? It's not always burning down. I learned a lot of things in that time as a gift of mercy from God in what seemed like not a very merciful thing. I believe we get this gift from God, and as recipients of mercy and then transmitters of mercy, there are times when giving mercy means stepping back and letting consequences do their work. Well, okay, we can move on next time. I hope I get to connect with you this way again on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.